All right, well, good evening, folks. Welcome, bienvenue à tous. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate National Engineering Month. Merci de nous rejoindre pour célébrer le mois national du génie. National Engineering Month is a really unique opportunity to highlight the impact of the engineering community, reflect on how far the profession has come, and also consider how we still need to evolve in order to best serve all Canadians. My name is Jasmine Shaw, and I'm a professional engineer, project manager, and champion for diversity engineering, currently serving on the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force with the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, OSPE, and I am very honored to be moderating today's discussion. So before we begin the programming, I would like to acknowledge that I am located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. They have and continue to be caretakers of the land and waters on which present-day Ottawa is situated. And as we are, of course, gathered virtually from across the nation, I encourage everyone to take the time to learn about the Indigenous communities in your region. And one great starting place is to use the nativeland.ca tool, which I shared in the chat. But of course, going beyond learning towards action, I also encourage folks to identify ways that you can meaningfully contribute to reconciliation. So whether this is by advocating for and with the advancement of Indigenous colleagues in your organization, by supporting local Indigenous-owned businesses in your community, or sponsoring organizations such as Indigisteam and Actua that deliver STEM programming to Indigenous youth, there are steps that each of us can take, no matter how much power we hold. There are steps that all of us can take to progress truth and reconciliation within Canada. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you and our panelists to this evening's event, Bringing the Engineering into Politics. So we probably all know that engineering really touches all aspects of society, and this includes government and policy. However, politics is not exactly a typical career path for most engineers, as most of us know, and as I struggle to find folks for this panel, there is definitely a void when it comes to engineering representation in all levels of politics across this country. So in this panel, we are going to explore the journey of 5 engineers who have embarked on this pathway in one way or another. And we're going to unpack topics like how they leverage their engineering expertise and decision-making, the importance of engineering representation at all levels of politics, and how to transition from an engineering career to the political world. So let's dive in. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists today. So the first panelist is the Honorable Omar Al-Gabra, and he was first elected as the Member of Parliament for Mississauga Centre in 2015. He served as the Member of Parliament for Mississauga Arundel prior to that from 2006 to 2008, and he has served as Minister of Transport since January 2021. He also served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and to the Minister of International Trade Diversification before becoming Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs in 2019. He's a mechanical engineer by trade. He holds a Master of Business Administration and was a Distinguished Visiting Fellow with the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science at Toronto Metropolitan University. Welcome, Minister. Next up, we have Deepak Anand, and he is the MPP for Mississauga-Malton and was elected in the 2018 Ontario provincial election. He also serves as Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, and is a member of the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs. Deepak is a chemical engineer by trade from Punjab University in India and earned his MBA from the School of Business at York University. Next is Dr. Shafaza Esmail, and she has a background in environmental engineering and has since diversified her academic interests to focus on the interdisciplinary nature of sustainability topics. Through her PhD, she had various opportunities to tackle complex environmental problems, including food and soil security in sub-Saharan Africa. She currently works at Mohawk College within their Applied Research Division, consulting with small and medium-sized businesses on sustainability-related goals, such as reducing their carbon footprint or energy emissions within operations, products, or services. Last year, Shafaza put her name forward to represent the Waterloo riding as their provincial candidate with the Green Party of Ontario. She learned a lot about running a successful campaign and about what it means to represent a community. While the incumbent gained victory, she hopes to be the voice of Waterloo residents again at the next election. She also volunteers with BrainSTEM Alliance, which provides STEM education and outreach to elementary and high school students, both in person and online. In her free time, she enjoys a good story, rock climbing, and exploring through local travel. Welcome, Shafaza. Next up, we have Durga Prout. So Durga Prout is a London resident since 2004, the chair of the board of directors of Unity Project for the Relief of Homelessness in London, an activist with the London Regional Social Forum, president of Spelling Bee of Canada's London chapter, and a two-time former candidate for the federal New Democratic Party of Canada. Durga works to bring people hope and live life to their fullest extent. In her professional life, she is a professional consulting civil engineer with over 25 years of experience in geotechnical engineering in BC, the GTA, and Southern Ontario. She holds a Bachelor of Applied Science from the University of Toronto and a master's degree from the Missouri University of Science and Technology. Durga has participated on several panels discussing women in STEM, politics, or both. And as a former London Science Fair judge, she has also volunteered with the London District Construction Association's Women in Construction Committee and the London District Heavy Construction Association Education Committee to encourage women, girls, and youth to pursue careers in construction. Welcome, Durga. And last but not least, we have Gabrielle Bouchard. Gabrielle is an engineer, public sector consultant, Action Canada fellow, and civics enthusiast. She's a senior manager for Collier's Infrastructure Advisory Group by day and civics YouTuber by night as creator of the YouTube platform Gabby on Government, which explores Canadian civics in an accessible format. Her professional experience has ranged from inspiring children to study science in Nunavut with the national STEM outreach organization ACTUA, to consulting work at Deloitte, to managing the engineering outreach strategy at the University of Oxford. Thank you so much for being here tonight. So now I want to, before we dive into the panel, just make sure I can pin all of the panelists so that we can see your faces. Actually, Maslina or Ishmael, would you be able to help me do that, just to pin the 5 panelists to the top so that we can see them? If that's possible, that would be fantastic.
Yep, I'm doing that right now.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to start with hopefully a bit of an easy question. And really, I want to know what the catalyst was for each of you to really pursue a career in politics. So, you know, we have 2 current elected officials, we have 2 folks who have run for office, and then Gabrielle, I know you're kind of in that middle ground where you are focused on civics education and awareness building. But each of you kind of have explored this pathway in one way or another. And so I want to know what that catalyst really was for you to embark on this pathway and how your engineering background has served you in any way, shape, or form as you have embarked on your political journey. So we'll start with Minister Alghabra, if you want to share what your journey has been like.
Thanks, Jasmine. First of all, let me say thank you to you for facilitating this gathering, and it's a pleasure and honor to be with such esteemed co-panelists who are going to bring a lot to the table with different experiences. I want to thank OSPE as well for bringing us all together, and happy Engineering Month, everyone. You know, for me, the process of running for office started very organically, and it was never my intention to run for office. It was a passion of mine where I enjoyed getting involved. I volunteered with a couple of community organizations, and one of the common themes with either of these organizations was, let's go meet with our elected officials to advocate for the social policy ideas that we have. Because if you don't plant your ideas, if you don't advocate for them, you won't ever be, heard. And it was that opportunity that led me to meet interesting elected officials at municipal, provincial level. It really opened up my eyes. Up until that moment, I assumed politicians were from Mars and from a different species that I couldn't really reach, couldn't interact with. And I still remember how pleasantly surprised I was, how simple it was to reach out and set up a meeting with elected officials. I also discovered not only are they humans, but some of them were, smarter than the others, some were kinder than the others, some were, they're like the rest of us. And I felt after interacting and getting to know many elected officials, I felt an urge to support the ones I felt that advocated and championed things that I cared for, issues that I really cared for. And I realized that those elected officials would not automatically get reelected. They need help during campaigns. And I felt that it was in my best interest and the interest of the causes that I believed in, that they get reelected. So I found myself knocking on doors for candidates and support and distributing flyers, and that then led me to getting more partisan, involved in a political party, and that eventually, when my member of parliament retired, I decided to run for office. So that was really the organic journey for me. Up until the moment I decided to run, I thought the private sector, corporate world was going to be my career and my future. And when the opportunity presented itself, I really was hesitant. But looking back now, I'm really grateful for every moment, including those that had setbacks, including those that had defeats. They taught me a lot, and I'm grateful for every moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never know where your career will lead you. I think that's a key takeaway. Deepak, how about you? Tell us about what your foray into politics and the transition from industry and from engineering was like for you, and what the catalyst was for you.
Thank you, Jasmine. And before I start, as the minister said, I want to say thank you to you for the leadership role that you're playing in this event today, and each of the STEM fellows. Thank you for taking out time so we all STEM fellows can talk, learn from each other, and can probably encourage many more STEM people into something which I believe is most important part of our life. I mean, whether you are an active politician or not, right from the day we are born till we stay, we always have politics in our life, whether it is working with our parents, working with our siblings. So, I always believe you can take politics away from us, but you can never take out of us. So I think it's a great initiative. So just wanted to say thank you. Now, your question was how I got into, and I think it is probably similar for many. The two words I would always use is destiny and addiction were the two reasons I joined politics. I say destiny because destiny took me when I came to Canada on January 15, 2000. I started my life as a lab technician for an automotive company. And right across my office was somebody who was running from Malton for the Conservative Party of Canada, federal candidate. And I was young, I was in my 20s, and he was looking for a volunteer, or you call it help. And he saw me a couple times standing outside my office, taking a bus, going home. So he approached me and he asked me a very simple question: would you like to give me a ride? And I said, well, it saves me $3 and half an hour to 45 minutes. The answer is always yes. So that was the destiny. So I went home with him, and on the way, he offered me if I can help him. And I had lots of time back then, at that time. So I said, sure. So that was one thing. Now the term addiction. When I joined Schulich School of Business, one of our professors wanted to encourage the students to join not-for-profit organization charities. So I was offered with 2 board of director positions for 2 different charities. And I still remember when I went to these charities and started working, and as minister was talking about, whenever we sit, we will talk about 2 things. We will say, we need to have a policy change so that we can encourage more of what we're doing, or we need funding to whatever policy change has happened. In order for us to implement, we need money. So in either cases, as a board of director, we would go and meet all these politicians. And let's be honest, all these politicians will give us some help. And with that money of people, and with the help of these politicians, we will deliver results. And what happens is when you deliver such results, somebody will walk up to you and thank you for the work that you did. But if you really look at it, you're just a 1 point percentage of the total work. But that is where the addiction starts. When somebody walks up to you, pat your shoulder and say, you've done a good job, you want to hear more of those thank yous. You want to do more of that work. You want to say, okay, you know what? I did this. I spent 4 hours. I got this. Thank you. What if I spend 8 hours? Means I'll get 2 thank yous. And that addiction continues to grow within yourself. And again, I go back to destiny. So what happens was, at some point of time, I felt, you know what? I've noticed that when I do things, I get results. But what if I'm one of those who are part of those decision makers? Maybe I'm able to deliver more. Maybe I'm able to get more of those thank yous. Maybe this is the addiction that is forcing me to get into more. And that's how I joined the politics. So I just will leave it here. And as Minister was talking about, an opportunity came. I wasn't even sure I will win because I was in Canada for only 16 years. I don't even have a 10th cousin in this country. I owe to the community. I thank the friends I had and the relationship I built. If I have to say, if I'm an MPP, it is not my success. It is their effort, their support that I became an MPP. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And I can absolutely resonate with how powerful a drug impact can be, and creating impact for other people. That can be a huge motivator. So I can understand that. Gabrielle, tell us a little bit about your journey. I know you're kind of in more of the civics education side and not necessarily politics per se, but I think you have a really interesting story. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'm actually involved in one of the most important parts of politics, which is the behind the scenes. I was the president of a local EDA and a prominent Toronto riding for a number of years. So I can't help myself, part of my civic education, if anybody here wants an easy way to get involved in politics, every riding and every party has a riding association. It's in your neighborhood or your region, and they're always looking for volunteers to help pick candidates, vet candidates, and then do the hard work of actually getting them elected come election time, and doing all the promotion and keeping the momentum up in between. But how did I get to that place? So my degree is in civil engineering, and throughout my engineering education, I was heavily involved in engineering outreach, especially for youth. And I worked in some tough places, from Nunavut to the east end of Hamilton and everywhere in between. And I saw, I just saw how, we're all Canadians, and how you can start from such different places, even though we're all from the same country. So I was always curious about this, like why do these inequalities exist? And is there anything we can do to help young people who don't have any control over these external factors have a bit more of an equal playing field when it comes to realizing their potential? That was during my engineering degree. And then, I did some traditional engineering work. But then at one point, I took a little stint at the University of Oxford for a few years as their director of engineering outreach, which was really fun. But that was my first opportunity to be able to run initiatives that I thought would be most successful. So it got me really interested in, okay, if we're going to be trying to encourage young people into STEM, because at the time I thought that STEM education, like, this is the gold standard. If you can get a STEM education, you can lift yourself up. But I started to see that this ideal that I had wasn't completely true, because things like stress levels in the home, access to transportation, access to nutrition in your neighborhood, all of these things that have nothing to do with education are actually the biggest factors in how successful a young person can be in achieving their potential. So this is what put the nugget in my head of, okay, there's something more than education at play here. And that's what really got me interested in civics, in politics, and in government. So I went to YouTube to see if I could, get the Canadian politics and civics 101, but it wasn't available. So I started my own YouTube channel called Gabby on Government, where you can follow my journey learning about government, and I try to explain everything that I'm learning. And then that led to the Action Canada Fellowship, where I really got immersed into policy. That led me to get involved in my local riding association, actually in politics and helping select candidates, which was really fun. And I have to agree with Deepak that I find this world deeply addictive. And for somebody with an engineering mind, there's so much structure to politics, and learning about that structure and the intricacies of the structure, I just find deeply fascinating. And then there's this crazy human element to it. So it's just this endless world of fun and deep impact. And if you're not, Jasmine, I know you said off the top, everybody can get involved in this sort of work. And I hope that us as panelists here inspire all of you to get involved in that. I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later on, but engineers have some of the best skill sets to be involved in politics. Thanks, Jasmine.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing, Gabrielle. And yeah, I think the fact that you saw a problem and you addressed, like, you were looking for this education and it wasn't available, and you're like, I'm just going to make it. I think that kind of take charge attitude is very indicative of engineers, and definitely something that we bring to the table. Thank you. So Durga, I would love to learn more about your engineering political journey and what maybe are some of the things that you have learned along the way.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the organizers, USP, Engineers Canada, and to you, Jasmine, for bringing us all together. It's wonderful to be among my peers in a different sense, poly engineers, as I call it. Not something I run into quite often. So thanks for that. I don't know if this is an addiction, but I grew up with my grandparents in Trinidad and Tobago, and they often had the parliamentary debates on the local radio station. So maybe that's where I have an addiction. But in general, deciding to run was different. For me, there was no one catalyst, just a series of observations of federal government decisions between the late 1990s and the early 2010s. And I reflected on how these decisions were affecting Canada's place in the world, ordinary Canadians, particularly London residents, myself, and those close to me, and also the environment. And to me, some of these major policies was not in the best long-term interest of the commons. So in 2015, inspired in part by my volunteering with the NDP since 2009, and then later a group called Evidence for Democracy. If you're not aware of who they are, Evidence for Democracy is a nonpartisan nonprofit that stands up for science and smart decision making in Canada. So I decided that it was time to run as a candidate when I saw, scientists actually protesting in Ottawa. So in 2019, I was recruited by a pair of women in London North Centre NDP and EDA, which is Electoral District Association that Gabrielle was talking about. And I seized upon the opportunity to take my public service, and I see engineering as a sort of public service because I do a lot of work on public infrastructure, and take that public service in a different directions. So there are a couple things about my engineering background that I feel serves me well in this journey. First is curiosity, and the second is a desire to have evidence-based public policy. So in my work as an engineer, curiosity is sometimes necessary to figure out the cause of a problem and then generate feasible solutions. And as a politician, you will be expected to provide input into a myriad of policy areas that you have absolutely no training in. So I utilize curiosity to be able to successfully prepare and engage in policy discussions with citizens. And as applied scientists, engineers are trained to provide solutions backed by evidence. And this knowledge will be needed to sell your party's policy to the voting public. But I'd like to add a third soft skill, which is necessarily taught in school, but you can learn it on your job, and you can use it to be successful both as an engineer and as a politician. And that soft skill is active listening. And this is a critical skill needed to gather information and to change hearts and minds and to garner support for your platform. And so that's how I came to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Circa. And yeah, I think growing up in an environment where politics is openly discussed, I think that can definitely have a huge influence on, you know, the eventual career path that you take. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so last but not least, Shafaza, tell us about what your foray into politics has looked like.
Definitely. And I'll echo what the other panelists said. Thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you for folks for attending today. I'll also do a quick land acknowledgement. I'm situated in the Haldimand tract here, which is land promised to the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral peoples, which is 10 miles on either side of the Grand River, also known as Dish with One Spoon area. And my own journey was a little bit different from other folks's, where while I was doing my PhD, which I chose to do outside of engineering because I wanted to learn more about the other disciplines and how they kind of helped me leverage a better understanding of tackling environmental problems, because environmental problems are so complex and you need more than just an engineering skill set to kind of understand it, and then also kind of come up with solutions that would be effective. So while I was doing my PhD, one of the aspects is doing teaching assistance and sessional instruction. And one course that I got was Introduction to Environmental Assessment. So I taught this course at least 5 terms, not necessarily in a row, but as I was teaching each term, I got a better understanding of the legislation that impacts the federal impact assessment, which started off as the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and is now the Impact Assessment Act. And during the teaching of that 5 terms, we went from the CIA 2012, which is the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, into the IAA, which is the Impact Assessment Act. And so I was able to learn by teaching the different aspects of government that go into policymaking. And this was specifically at the federal level, but we also gave examples at the provincial level, because within that time, the Conservative government also put forward an omnibus bill, which I learned about, which affected the Environmental Assessment Act of Ontario. And this course is a multidisciplinary course because it's not just environmental students who take this course, but also engineering students who take this course. So it was really interesting to see like the different levels of understanding with regards to the terminology that's required that goes into policymaking, and then all of the different changes that people want to put into policy, but then it needs to go through like a bunch of different tabling rounds to actually find a suitable solution or agreeable solution for people to let it follow its path from a bill to an act. So it was really interesting to kind of see that, but I still didn't understand politics at all, even though I was trying to teach it. And so one of the catalysts was my partner, Nicholas, who is very into politics, and he was able to explain a lot of these concepts to me. And while I was finishing up my PhD, I was approached by the Green Party to become a candidate for the federal election for 2019. But since I was still in my PhD and I really needed to finish it, I declined that offer. But after that came the provincial election in 2022. And for that, I agreed to run because I was interested to see what that aspect of life would be like in terms of like, actually, how does stakeholder engagement work? How would you actually listen to a lot of people and take their perspectives and put it together into something that could make a lot of people happy, in addition to being effective policy? So it was a very interesting experience for me to take the step into politics. And I think in terms of engineering, really it's the ability to be able to see different perspectives that helped me with this step into politics.
Absolutely. I think the big picture thinking and kind of that systems thinking that engineers bring to the table is one of the key things that I've noticed from the poly engineers, as Dirka calls them, in terms of the impact they're able to have. I think that is one of the key traits. And that's a great segue to the next question I want to ask all of you, which is, from your experience, what are some of the benefits and the impact that engineers can tangibly bring to the table, whether it's at the municipal, provincial, or federal level? And are there any anecdotes or specific examples that maybe you can share either from your or another engineer's experience that you've kind of observed where they have positively contributed to policymaking? And then kind of the flip side of that is, how are ways that engineers can better collaborate with other stakeholders to, put forth and advocate for the best engineering solution? Because often the best engineering solution is at odds with the most politically expedient or the most efficient solution. So we'd love to know, your thoughts on kind of the impact that engineers can bring to the table and ways that they can, collaborate with other stakeholders to ensure that impact is actually comes to fruition. So for this, I would like to start with Dirka, if you could share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think one of the strengths of engineers is that we're trained to deal with complex problems, right? Even if they're ill-defined by a client, and we produce solutions. And certainly the voices of engineers should be added to others to maintain a vibrant democracy. We are trained to provide solutions that are also time-bound and for an agreed upon cost and scope. So we can understand the budgetary demands of a country or a province or a municipality, and also time constraints. That's something that is inherent in what we do in our day-to-day professional lives. One of the things when I was doing some browsing for this is I came across some articles from the American Society of Civil Engineers about encouraging engineers in politics. And they sort of zoned in on the fact that we take a professional oath to do things in the best interest of the public. And we also are not, if people who are in the audience who are not engineers, you probably will notice that you do not see ads for engineers in publication in newspapers. And you might see once in a while in an engineering company, but generally we don't do that because we try to present the facts as is and work within those boundaries without embellishment. And I think to have that sort of critical eye and having more of a long-term view is what we need more of in politics, rather than personal ideology or looking for the next electoral cycle. But I must say, just quickly before I turn it over to the other panelists, that it would be very difficult in the kind of way that we elect politicians right now to get that long range view, because in my opinion, first past the post is not the answer. We need some sort of proportional representation where we're more encouraged to be collaborative rather than adversarial, taking into account other voices and looking for the long view. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's when it comes to like engineers getting involved in politics, there's a certain way that engineers kind of deal with things. They do, we collaborate so often. It's really integral to the work that we do. We have to work with other stakeholders. So I think a lot of engineers kind of crave that, that collaboration piece. So perhaps that is a deterrent for engineers to get involved. Deepak, would love to hear from you and great to see that you're able to join on video. What's your take in terms of the positive impact that engineers can bring to the table when it comes to politics?
Well, thank you. I started with this way, and I like to put the analogies in place. And I think about you're trying to make a curry, and what you need is you need a salt. Sometimes, if you're trying to make a soup, you need vegetables, you need many ingredients. So think about you're making a tea, and you like sugar in the tea, and you forgot to put the sugar in the tea. Well, tea is a tea, but it won't taste good. I truly believe that we need in this world each different type of people to run the world, to serve the country, serve the world. So if think about it, if we have all the lawyers, because they'll think in the same way, doesn't mean that's the best way, or having all economics people, or having all engineers. So having a place on the table adds up by having the segregation not being there, by having this diversity of thoughts and experiences. I think that's what I truly believe is the best way forward. And I don't see many engineers on that table. In my opinion, that's bad, that's wrong. And that's one reason when I was running for politics, I felt, something which I can bring it to the table is something which is probably somewhat missing. I won't say absolutely missing. And again, that's what I think was the important part. So I would say the best way, the best thinkers are the thinkers when there is a diversified thinking in process, and we do bring that a piece in place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, 100%. I think similarly in the corporate world and in industry, we know that greater diversity on boards, on teams leads to better outcomes, better results. So of course, naturally, the same thing applies to politics. Having that diversity of thought will ultimately lead to better social solutions that are being created. Thank you. Shahbaza, how about you? What's your take on the impact that engineers can bring to the table?
I agree with what Durga and Deepak already said, but I also think that engineers tend toward optimization quite a bit, and we like to think about how to reach a great solution by not compromising other parts as much as possible. So I think that's one of the skill sets that comes into play. And when you think about engineering in any discipline, we're not only looking at whatever system that we're working with, we're also going to be thinking about how does the system connect to another system. So in the Canadian government, you have the federal, you have the provincial, and then you have the municipal. And you have, for example, transportation, which has components in all three of these government levels. And so if you have an engineer at the municipal level, that person will not just be thinking about how do we effectively optimize transportation for the service of the people within municipal regions, but how do we also connect this so that it goes seamlessly with what the province is doing and with what the federal government is doing. And if we had engineers at multiple levels, then they could actually talk to each other about these different systems. Ideally, if only the different governments would talk to each other like that. And so we would be able to bridge some of these discrepancies, these gaps that are already appearing by having these three levels of government.
As someone who is trained in systems engineering, I love to hear that perspective about looking at the interfaces between the different systems and the data flows between them. That's a classical engineering approach, and I think exactly like you said, that's one of the reasons that those perspectives are so valuable, because you see the gaps, the discrepancies in services that maybe other folks don't see if they're only looking at that little piece. So thank you for sharing that. Gabrielle, what about you?
Yeah, what do engineers bring to the table in politics? I thought about this question a lot, but Durga brought up something that I'd like to echo, which is ethics. I think that it is there are few professions that take ethical oaths, and very few of them are represented in politics. And I think that doctors included, there's quite a few. Do lawyers? I'm sure lawyers must have some professional obligations, but it is. I think that the more people in politics that we have with some sort of ethical background, the better. what I probably would have said before Dirk brought up ethics is, I mean, I worked for the TTC, but everybody knows this example. There is, I don't know if anybody here is from Scarborough, but the Scarborough subway line is like Durka is like, so you know what I'm talking about. It's like a Frankenstein vehicle. It is way over its usable lifespan. They're spending a ton of money keeping it alive because there's no other solution to bring people to and from Scarborough at the moment. And this was seen, must have been at least 20 years ago, probably even further down the line. It's been a while since I looked at the case, but maybe even 30 years. And the politicians keep kicking this can down the line until it gets to this place where it's totally out of control. And now Scarborough is looking at using buses on that area, which is not suitable for the community. And I wonder if there had been a strong engineer at the helm at some point in those 30 years to say, look, enough is enough, because all of the engineers who are working on that, they are unified. They're saying the same thing. We got to replace this. We've got to do the work. And it needed to be done yesterday. But for whatever, and maybe I would be so curious for our sitting politicians on the line to give me some insight into this. But for some reason, it's not done. And I would be so curious to see if we had a few engineers, if this would have been a different situation. So that's all I'll say on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that, perfect segue to Minister Alghabra. So, in your role, particularly kind of in a more of a technical, one of the more technical ministries compared to, other departments, being transportation, have you found that your engineering background has served you in any way? And perhaps to Gabrielle's point, have you, found that having engineers, not necessarily as elected officials, but, in senior leadership positions as public servants, has that contributed to any of these changes that she's talking about?
Yeah, look, I found each and every comment to be to resonate with me, and to be interesting as well. And let me just say, yes, I totally believe, and I talked to the panelists before we joined the session about a conference, and there's a sign, there's a poster behind me about a conference that I organized at Toronto Metropolitan University in 2015. Before I got elected, at least this second time around, and the theme of the conference was "Engineers Want In," which is into public policy sphere. And if you think about it, the major challenges that we are facing as a society, climate change, how to build our cities and infrastructure, cybersecurity. And the list goes on and on. They need engineers. They need a perspective of an engineer to address these big challenges that faces our society. And while as politicians and elected officials, we rely significantly on the advice of public service. So let's not completely strip out if the House of Commons doesn't have a lot of engineers, it doesn't mean they're not guided by engineering advice. There's a lot of engineers who provide advice, but certainly it helps to have that mindset, that perspective that has been mentioned is sorely lacking at the elected level. So for sure, I believe that my perspective, that my background has helped me personally, and I like to believe that helped the debate and the discussion that takes place around cabinet table or in our caucus and then in the House of Commons. But I also don't want to simplify it. I know some of us would like to think, engineers, we have simples, because if we only followed the science, we know what the answers are. And the subway is a great example that Gabriel brought up. Of course, if we only followed, and that's the one thing, by the way, why many engineers don't feel comfortable in politics. is because there are a lot of things that we know what the right answer is. 1 + 1 is 2. But the reality in life, science alone is not sufficient to persuade people. There needs to be other type of dimensions that are involved in the discussions that take place. There needs to be compromises, there needs to be consultation, there needs to be all kinds of considerations that we in engineering school were not taught how to do. Yes, we are collaborative with other engineers, but when it comes to things that don't necessarily make sense in the formula or in the science, we don't know how to deal with it. So we also need, I can tell you, I've certainly like to say that I've enhanced my set of skills when I entered politics, because I discovered maybe when I was working in the private sector, science was sufficient. But when you work in public sector, science is not sufficient. Yes, it's important, but it's not sufficient on its own. And that's the other thing that I think the combination is essential. So let me double down. I think we need more engineers in the public sphere. There is nowhere nearly enough. But I also think that engineers can do more to nurture a certain set of skills that we are not taught in school, nor do we have to encounter in engineering profession if we work in an engineering profession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the science and the math are the easy parts. It's the human element that is the difficult part for many engineers. So I think that's a good kind of transition to the next topic I wanted to chat about, which is really just about that multidisciplinary kind of characteristic of engineering. So even though perhaps some engineers, they work in their silo and they're very constrained to their little scope and their little component, kind of the higher up you go, engineering is ultimately a very multidisciplinary practice. So we work with designers, project managers, technicians, analysts, customers, so many other stakeholders that all have different needs and challenges and goals for a given project, which, if we kind of look at the political world is kind of a mirror when you're trying to develop, a social solution, whether that's a program or a policy. There are different stakeholders that you have to satisfy. You have different customers, folks with different needs that are all coming from different places. So there's kind of that mirror of trying to, ultimately build a solution that maybe doesn't work for everyone, but for as many folks as possible. So I'm curious for each of the panelists, how is your kind of experience dealing with that multidisciplinary aspect of engineering? Has that, kind of shaped your perspective on engineers and politics? Has it allowed you to, put forth better solutions for, our currently elected politicians? What are your thoughts on kind of that multidisciplinary piece? And I would like to start with Deepak for this one. Deepak, you are muted if you are talking.
Sorry about that. I had to run to the washroom, so I have to hear that question again.
No worries. Yeah, I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on, how the multidisciplinary aspect of engineering, working with different, stakeholders, customers, folks with different needs, how that's kind of been mirrored in your political journey when, similarly, you're working with constituents that have different needs, different backgrounds, and what that kind of experience has been like.
Well, I think I would say the experience has been great in the sense because we follow the process. For everything, we take a paper, we start writing it down. And that's the best asset that I think as an engineer, I found. Because every time there's some resident comes in and I'll bring my notebook and I'll start making the flow chart. Okay, what happened first? Then what happened? It's like a timeline of any issue. So those kind of things what we've learned is actually as helping us out. And in fact, many times some of the other people who are from the economics background or from the other arts background, they look at you and they say, okay, yeah, that's the best way to work. I think learning the process, education was the reason I think we are able to do more and better in this profession. So that I believe is the asset as an engineer.
Mm-hmm. Everything always starts with the flowchart. Gabrielle, what's your take on this?
I'll be brief because I'm not in office, but I think that we've got a lot of engineering project managers, and project management is a huge aspect of organizing. I mean, you know, from the very beginning, organizing people. You need people behind you. You need this machine of you know, to get yourself elected. And then once you're in office, I imagine it's all project based. So you know, project management skills. Life cycle management skills with the Scarborough subway. But one thing, I mean, Omar, once you answer, and Deepak, I'd also be curious about you. Like you, Omar, you mentioned skills that engineers don't learn that you need, and I would be so curious to hear if you could give us a preview of those as well.
Go for it. You're up next.
Okay.
On my list.
I was waiting for you, Jasmine. I wasn't sure who was going to be next. Look, again, I think it's your question, Jasmine, is an extension of the previous question, and the same answer. Absolutely, the set of skills that I learned as an engineer, whether in school or in the profession, has helped me a lot. I would believe in navigating the complicated world of politics and government. And one of those is troubleshooting, right? I think sometimes in the messy world of politics, sometimes people forget what problem we're trying to solve. And I think I rely significantly on my ability to hone in on, help me understand first the problem, and then let's try to figure out, find the solution that solves the problem, or at least mitigates the problem. So and again, I gained that ability from not just from school, but also from practicing engineering in the private sector. The question about what set of skills that engineers can do more of, especially in schools. I worked when I was as a visiting fellow at the Faculty of Engineering with Ryerson, now known as Toronto Metropolitan, is communication. I would say communication skills are barely or rarely, if at all, talked about during engineering school. And I believe it is because there's a fundamental belief. If you understand how the formula works, then you know how to get the answer. And once you get the answer, the right answer is the right answer. There's very few problems in engineers that can have wide divergence of the right answer. So therefore, you're not equipped to explain a lot how you got that answer. And I gave several lectures at the university talking to first year and second year students, is that, look, you could be good at engineering and you'll always find a job, but if you lack in communication skills, very few people will know how good you are. Very few people will know what is it that you are doing. So I revert back to what I said, and that's when I meant by science alone is not sufficient, math alone is not sufficient, the formula alone is not sufficient. You need to be able to explain the process, explain the homework, and explain how you got to that answer. And the active listening that Dirka talked about is also not something that is taught a lot in school, because again, there's a process that you're taught, and it's very there's rigor to it. But in the world of politics, which, by the way, as Deepak said, encompasses everything, even as an engineer working in the private sector, you come across politics at work. So So those skills, I think, are essential. The active listening and the ability to communicate and explain your perspective, and then be willing to compromise, obviously without compromising safety or security. Those are essential set of skills that you need in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the kind of perspective of, okay, like if we know that we need engineers in politics because they provide this certain set of skills, then how can we reverse engineer the engineering curriculum to basically, better train engineers or engineering graduates to pursue this career path? Because, and this is kind of a separate conversation altogether, but, I think a lot of folks would probably agree that like you were saying, Minister, and like other folks have said that, there are certain aspects of engineering education that are definitely lacking. And we have seen some change in that area. But I think if that's the outcome we're driving towards, of let's get more engineers involved in politics, whatever kind of manifestation that looks like, then we need to change the curriculum to, actually prepare them for that, and not just to become, people who end up working kind of traditional engineering roles. So I think that would be an interesting, separate but interesting conversation to have.
But Jasmine, sorry, that also, not only will it equip new graduates to be politicians, it will equip them to be CEOs. It will equip them to be leaders. So that's why it will be really helpful to do these other type of skills during school.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Shfaza, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that I'll kind of focus on one thing that I learned in my undergrad, and then like what happened afterwards. In terms of engineering, we tend to say we are very collaborative and we kind of understand other perspectives. But when we are in our undergraduate degree, we are actually quite disciplinary. We have like our different disciplines, and it's not until almost like the third or fourth year or final year that we start doing a lot of more of those capstone projects, where we start to understand how different components and working with different people works. I mean, sure, there's a little bit of teamwork throughout this time, but it's usually with peers and not so much like different perspectives. It's like you have this course, you all learn the same thing, you just have different like thoughts about how to go about doing it. But it's not until you graduate from that and you start interacting with people of different perspective, different backgrounds, that you start to actually have an understanding of how do you listen to different perspectives and also contribute your own. So one thing I learned in fluid mechanics that was just like hammered in was state your assumptions. And after undergrad, I realized it's not just state your assumptions, it's also check your assumptions. Like that's what I learned while I was doing research. And then when I started talking to more people, it was actually question your assumptions that came into like my being when I have conversations with people, because everyone has a different story, different like life experiences. And what really helped when I was talking to people while knocking on doors or calling them for the campaign was the active listening, absolutely, and the trying to figure out what our base assumptions are that we're bringing to this conversation. So one of the things that really helps with that is being able to find those questions that opens up discussion without making somebody feel like you're probing or that you're selling or that you're interrogating. So it's one of those skills of asking questions to really want to understand what the other person is saying and where they're coming from. And that's also one of the skills that we don't learn in undergraduate degrees. I don't know if we have the capability to really learn that at that point. I think it really comes through a lot of these interactions and a lot of these experiences working with different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point, to Minister Algabra's point, there's a lot of changes that we could certainly interject to engineering curriculum to have more of those interdisciplinary that focus. So Minister, I know that you do need to drop. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time out of what I'm sure is your busy schedule to join us this evening and share your perspective, your story as a poly engineer. We appreciate you taking the time and hope folks were able to, learn a lot for me this evening. Deepak, I know you have to drop in a few moments as well.
No, Jasmine, before I leave, I just want to say and want to request, and I like to call it a freezing the moment. Freezing the moment is the term. So if anyone and everyone who's here can turn on their camera so that we can have a picture with the minister. It's not easy to get a picture with the minister. So let's get the opportunity and utilize it. So then we can showcase and we can send a text and email to minister's office. Here's my work. Here's the picture with the minister. So let's do that.
And actually, Ismail and Maslina, we can do the same for OSPI, please.
So if anyone and everyone who's here, if you can please open your camera. And by the way, before I leave, I see more uptake. See, one thing is, Jasmine, engineers are camera shy. This is another take you can take from here.
That is true. All right, I am good to go with the screenshots. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you, folks. And I agree, it is indeed, I would say this is quite a unique event because not only do we have, the minister here, but we also have folks from each of the major parties in Canada, either at the federal or provincial level, which I think is a really unique instance and opportunity to show that indeed we can be collaborative and work across party lines to, come up with the best solution. So I think that's something worth celebrating as well. So thank you for
Jasmine, I just want to say
thank
you to you and to my co-panelists for this opportunity, and I'm grateful to those who joined us. I apologize, I need to go, but I look forward to further and future participation with all of you and how we can more promote our profession, more encourage engineers to get involved in public policy in all aspects of society. The rest of Canada needs to know about the excellent work that engineers do every day. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay, so I want to jump back to Durga now. After that brief little interlude, want to give you the chance to share your thoughts on the discussion about collaboration and interdisciplinary, about interdisciplinary collaboration when it comes to engineering and politics.
Yes, certainly. The ministers, both of them alluded to things like process and skills that are picked up on the job. And I want to echo that is the reality that I actually found, right? For me, it was even more siloed because geotechnical engineering is such a specialist discipline within the broader civil engineering body of knowledge. But what I found is that once I switched to civil, I was working with more of a mining firm before the early part of my career. I took on a lot of multidisciplinary projects in the public sphere. And not only do the stakeholders and other personnel have different needs, they also have little to no clear understanding of what my geotechnical team does. So then it becomes my job and our job as a team to translate our technical knowledge into plain language for communication. And this needs to be tied clearly to project goals, and where applicable, how our approaches, tests, and explorations contribute to overcoming project challenges. Because right now in my field, we have that challenge with geotechnical engineering becoming a commodity and everybody seeing each provider as the same, which it isn't. So I think multidisciplinary teams, to be effective, need clear lines of communication, as Minister Alghabra did say, and active listening is certainly a key skill that's also, along with communication skills, not taught in schools. But you also need conflict resolution, negotiation, and persuasion. And certainly this is something that I think will translate not only at the door if you're canvassing as a candidate, but also in Queen's Park or Parliament Hill. At times I've had to engage my curiosity to understand better people's needs and challenges, both in the technical world and also as a candidate, because there a lot of the things I have to deal with are totally outside my specialty. So you have to ask a lot of questions, and, not only check your assumptions, I would say you'll have to add your assumptions. In fact, you might not even know what your assumptions are. So there are the questions. And as an analogy, positions are staked out by various parties at the level I run in, federal, and is also provincial. So you might find that your party position may not be fully in line with that of your constituents or the opponents, and who you want to adopt you want them to adopt your proposal, right? So due to the composition of parliament and your position and of your party, whether you're on the government side or the opposition side, there needs to be a certain amount of debate and negotiation to get that motion adopted, and definitely compromise is needed in there. Yeah, so these are skills that conflict resolution, active listening, negotiation, persuasion, good communication, certainly ones that engineers need to develop outside of the school system. I think the school system can do some work, but certainly, having some of it could be developed by taking courses outside your discipline, humanities, a lot of it by volunteering and these sort of activities you choose to do outside of school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that really kind of ties in with what I wanted to ask next. Almost like this was planned this way. But in terms of, some of the barriers that engineers face to getting involved. So you talked about, kind of the skill gap when it comes to more of like the interpersonal skills, and how that's not often something that's taught to engineers. You talked about some of kind of the structural barriers as well. But I'm curious, so Durga and Shafaza, you have both run for office. Gabrielle, you have been involved with the Writing Association. From your different experiences and perspectives, what are some of the other barriers that you've noticed for engineers to get involved? Maybe ones that you experienced firsthand, if you were the only engineer that you knew that was running, in terms of awareness and information and just how to start. Like, what were some of the barriers that you faced, and how would you like to see those barriers removed so that the next generation, so we can foster the next generation of poly engineers, which is a term I'm going to use going forward. Shafaza, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my biggest obstacle was understanding the system, which I still don't understand. So when Gabriella was like, like really understanding all the nuances and all the different aspects of the structure, and I'm just like, yeah, that would be great. I don't have a good foundation. And I think that's a lot of it is because I come from Tanzania, and I moved here when I was 12 years old. So I wasn't entrenched in this system from when I was here. And I was just about starting to understand the system in Tanzania, the political system. And I was starting to get interested in that. But in Tanzania, it was really just two political parties. And it had always been dominated by one party. And it didn't have three levels of government, whereas Canada has the three levels of government, and many parties, even though the prominent ones that are shown and kind of advertised are two or three main ones. And I found when I was talking to constituents at the door, many wouldn't know exactly what party was like incumbent within an area at the provincial level. They mistake it sometimes for the incumbent at the federal level, which in some writings are different. So I think just understanding of the system is something that is like quite a large barrier. And my civics class of grade 10 did not do justice to it. And I honestly do not know what the solution would be to overcoming this barrier, besides the amazing YouTube series that Gabriella has put on. Yeah, I think that's really the biggest obstacle that I encountered, and I see other folks encountering as well, not just engineers, but just people in general, for engaging with politics a lot more. In terms of engineering specific, I think seeing so many discrepancies and redundancies that aren't effective, because we like to have redundancies in engineering systems, fail-safes, but these don't, the redundancies in the government system don't seem to allow for effective service to the constituents, whether they're municipal or provincial or federal. It seems to instead hinder the actual service. So that, I think, is quite frustrating, and hitting a roadblock like that multiple times and knowing that there might be a solution out there, or trying to figure out a solution, but not having anyone really listen or pay attention or having it gain traction can be quite frustrating. So I think that's one of the other obstacles that's more engineering specific, that would be really great to overcome. But again, I don't really know what the solution is to overcome that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, when engineers see problems, they want to fix them, and it's, you know, both a blessing and a curse. So I think that point of frustration probably resonates with a lot of folks. When you see something wrong and something that appears to be inefficient, you want to optimize it and make it better, or you're just like, nope, I'm not getting involved. Gabrielle, curious what your thoughts are in terms of some of the barriers. Maybe you can share, you know, if you have any anecdotes or stories about, you know, the videos and the content that you've created, and if that has helped to remove, you know, that at least that knowledge barrier for folks to get involved in politics in some capacity.
Well, I think it has, and I would love there to be more people like me out there who are trying to educate people about civics, because Shafaza, you are certainly not the only one. I was born and raised in Canada, and I didn't know the difference. This is so embarrassing. I'm among friends here, right? I didn't know the difference between an MP and an MPP probably until I was in university, which is ridiculous. And I took grade 10 civics, so that just goes to show you. So I hugely echo that civic education is a huge problem. And it is complicated though, like 3 levels of government. It's really 2.5 levels of government, because the provincial government rules the municipal government. And it is just confusing to the everyday person. I think beyond that, and you know what, I'm gonna do a quick shameless promotion. This is, if anybody here wants to get involved in politics, this is a really good starting place. This is one of my least viewed videos, but it gives you some really good tips on how to get started in you know, getting active in civic life. I think that the main problems, though, that engineers face in getting involved in politics is just really an extension of the problems that everybody faces getting involved in politics. So, you know, education is one of them. The pay isn't great. It's really, really time-consuming and expensive to run. If you work in the public service, you often have to take a leave of absence. You usually have to take a leave of absence from your job. There's actually, if you look, I don't know if anybody here watches The Agenda. It's a really fantastic show, and they recently did an episode about all of the barriers to getting involved in politics, and they are very vast. I hope that part of the work that I do, and maybe all of you can join me in this work, is to make sure everybody knows how difficult it is to run for politics, and what a vocation the people that do run for politics take on. Because it is, I know that I was one of these people, again, very embarrassing, but when somebody would knock at my door during election time, I would kind of think that was annoying. Like, why, you know, I'm eating dinner, why are you talking to me? And I see people doing that online. I see people shaming candidates for doing canvassing, running for politics. But I hope you can all join me in spreading the word that for probably 90% of the people that run in this country, it is thankless. It can be embarrassing. It's extremely expensive. It comes at a high personal cost. And I think maybe if everybody just if everybody can give the people that do run for politics a bit more credit and, you know, kind of elevate the position of people that run for politics, maybe people will be more willing to do it instead of, you know, being the person that's kind of annoying showing up during election time at your door. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think having empathy for folks that are, you know, willing to put themselves out there in such a vulnerable position, I think that's really important. That's something that we can all do, which is kind of a nice, you know, reminder that yes, there are like the structural and education barriers that, you know, certain institutions might have more responsibility for, but collectively, you know, just as individuals, we can still kind of move the needle just in terms of our collective like discourse and how we think about folks who put themselves forward. So thank you for sharing that. Durga, anything that you wanted to add to this point?
Sure, a couple of things. One unfortunate incident happened at my 2019 nomination is that there was a person from a disadvantaged background running against me, and then they dropped out. And they felt that the Riding Association wasn't giving them sufficient support and some other things that I won't go into, but generally that's a segue to say that I think the way how we have set up the system is sort of geared towards people like us who have above average income, above average education, and it's increasingly shutting out working class people who might otherwise be great candidates, but are not given the opportunity. I mean, unless they belong to a union that allows them the time off. If you're someone else who's very active, and I'm saying this because I belong to a group, a grassroots, very grassroots group, in the very grassroots sense of the name, London Regional Social Forum, and you know, some of those people, they do a lot of activisms. If any one of them wants to transition to be like me, a candidate, I struggle to see how they're going to do it, except with a party that is totally behind them and provides help. So I'll give you an example. We as STEM professionals, particularly like myself, mid to late career, have above average income. So for that perspective, finances is not a barrier, because I work with a large firm, WSP. It gives unpaid leave, but you know, I can take, and I have on 2 occasions taken advantage of that. It also helps. And the reason why that leave is important is you need to be nominated early enough to be able to canvass well in advance of the election to get more doors, to get to see more doors. So time is to me more of an issue than that. And there are not too many firms, at least I've never seen any firms say unpaid leave for political campaigns. And if you're self-employed, or if you have a partnership or a small firm, or work in a small firm, it becomes even more challenging to find that time to run, and maybe even the finances. So economic realities may cause some employers to not hold the positions of people on unpaid leave for a political run, right? They say, you go find your own job. And so I think employers, and most importantly, the state, whether the state as a province or the state as of the country of Canada, needs to realize that running for office is a public good, just like jury duty, which for which we should have protective leave, and that is afforded to people, and they're also compensated. And financial and time barriers are greatest for persons with children, especially women who do the bulk of the care roles. There are also barriers for ethnic minorities, disabled people, Two-Spirit LGBTA people, and young professionals as well. Women may be reluctant to enter because they have young children. I know for me, I wanted to start a family, and that was something that delayed my entrance to run as a candidate. So now that we have a national childcare program. I'm hoping that will go somewhere to help, but the political parties themselves also have to provide a supportive environment. When you are an ethnic minority like I am, you will be subject to a certain amount of verbal and other abuse, and you need to run in a place where the people around you will protect you. And young people, I think, are also conflicted to run because there's a lot of learning that occurs during their early career. And that's when you're not earning a lot of money, but you're spending a lot, you're paying back your student loans, you're trying to buy a house. So in the absence of some protective and paid political leave, I don't think we'll have a lot of young people, particularly under the age of 30, running. And that's not good because there's an absence of young people in parliament. So there's also the reality that political landscapes is very much who you know sometimes. If your party nominates or appoints candidates, that's also a factor. So you need networks to sign up and convince people to vote in the nomination race. And then expectations. I'm just going to close on this. We have to remove the idea that politics is a dirty business that is beneath engineers. And I like to quote OSPE on this, on their website, they have this quote. The issues facing Ontario, Canada, and the world are increasingly complex and technical in nature. Engineers have scientific understanding of the world in which we live, meaning they appreciate how people and systems interact over the lifespan of projects. And engineers have an ability to simplify intricate problems and are skilled developers of evidence-based decision and scenarios. So it's not just for engineers, but I think there's a lot of work we have to do to make political representation accessible. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that, Durga. I really, I think that's a really powerful, point that the people whose voices we most need to hear are the ones who face the most barriers to actually have their voices heard. So it's a chicken and the egg, situation. If we want to have, traditionally underrepresented folks involved in politics, well, we have to remove the barriers to get them involved, and to remove the barriers to get them involved, we need them there so that they can call out the barriers. So it's kind of this, we're stuck in this cycle. So I think that that's a really, important problem to explore, and, could probably, I'm sure we could do a whole other discussion just on that. But thank you for, for discussing those and bringing those up. So we are almost at time, and there was a question in the chat, and I do want to leave a little bit of time if our three remaining panelists have a few extra moments to spare for the Q&A, since we didn't have as much time. But the question that came up in the chat that I'll read out, and for the Q&A, panelists, feel free to jump in. You don't have to answer. It's more of a free-for-all. So the question is to the panelists, did you introduce your engineering/infrastructure priorities as early as the nomination race, or did you save the technical issues and priorities for election season? So any feedback on that?
I can go. Since my discipline is environmental engineering, climate change was really at the forefront of a lot of what I wanted to talk about, and it aligned really well with the priorities of the Green Party as part of their platform. Even before their platform came out, they had climate change and ecological considerations as part of their platform. But also knowing that climate change is not just an environmental problem, it is also a social and cultural and economic problem, made it really one of those multifaceted problems to bring from the beginning of the race. So from the beginning, I was pretty adamant about my expertise in climate change, as well as the multidisciplinary aspect of it. And I brought that throughout the race. But because my field is not very technical, that was an easy call.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense when there is that alignment, that you would highlight your expertise. Durga, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it wasn't highlight in a direct way. So there was 3 main themes, both in my 2019 and 2021 campaigns, which was housing, which is a big problem in London and across Canada. But we also have with that the opioid crisis. And of course, as an engineer, I can tack into that. The other one was pharmacare, and the third one was the environment. So those were the 3 main pillars I ran on. And I also had a couple during my nomination campaign, which was industrial strategy for Canada, because London used to be a big manufacturer. We had plants like Electromotive, we had the Ford plant, and then these are all gone and replaced with nothing. And there was a lot of politics around that, which seemed to me to be not in the best interest, again, of Canadians or even Londoners. So there is some technical point, but I mean, I was more dealing with people issues and connecting it with the fact that I guess as an engineer, we can see connections. I know Shafaza was talking about that, the different connections you can see, and that's how I worked it into both my nomination campaign, where I actually had 5 pillars. The 5th one was about student loans, and not just loans, but also how the post-secondary system should be better funded for student housing and for compensation of postgrad students.
Thanks, Durga. Okay, so I know we're almost at time, but I see Dr. C. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You have your hand up, so we'll just take your question and then we will wrap up. So
thanks very much. So I really like that. I really enjoy that this discussion, and I wanted to take on a little couple of things. What Shifaza was talking about, the idea of optimization, and the first thing that came to my mind is the understanding of intersectionality. That it is important for engineers. I mean, we are very left-brain people, and all the discussions that we have are very left-brain. So how do you turn on your right brain? Because it is important for us to understand that as politicians, we are not just dealing with technical issues in terms of thinking about things from a technical perspective about optimization or any kind of related to technical side. So how do you learn about intersectionality in terms of how different identities of people in the community have their experiences impacted as a result of systemic racism or systemic misogyny or systemic xenophobia and all the other issues?
That's a great question. And I agree that when we talk about optimization, often it can be more on the technical or more the technological solution aspect of things. But I've found like that skill set of optimization really helps with like mediation, because you kind of understand where multiple perspectives or multiple people are coming from, because it's like multiple perspectives of the technology kind of interact. But then there's also multiple perspectives of people. And to be able to pull the common ground from the different people and try to collate that so that you can bridge what seem to be differences into something that seems to be more of a common ground, to actually start having those discussions on how we can have solutions that work for different people. So that's kind of how I think about optimization, going from the left side of the brain to the right side, and thinking about not just the present problem at hand, but how does it connect with other things? So like going with, okay, so let's say we want to optimize our system within the municipal area, but then we want to see how it connects to the provincial area. Then whatever we thought was optimal for municipality might not be optimal for that connection. So really thinking about that zooming in and zooming out and engaging the multiple scales when it comes to figuring out what works for an area. I know it gets kind of complicated after a while, but those are my thoughts, a little bit of a rambling. I think that with our current system, because of how hard it is to understand and how there has been all this systemic racism and systemic discrimination, really just discrimination because of the underlying foundation of how this country was created, which is really checking those assumptions and questioning those assumptions. I wonder whether we need to really have an overhaul of the system rather than thinking about optimizing the system.
I just wanted to mention one thing to Shivasa, that I would suggest that we are not looking for common ground, because common ground is not what we want to achieve. What we want to achieve is equity, right? Because there are more people more marginalized than others, way more marginalized. So it's not common ground that we want to achieve, but it's to make sure that people who are much more marginalized, depending on their intersectional identity, what they can do in order to achieve the maximum potential that they can have. So, let's not say common ground, because that means that there will be people who are much more privileged that they would also look for something that they want. So,
I agree, and this is why where I would go from trying to optimize to actually not trying to optimize, and just instead of fixing a system to actually overhauling a system and starting again, which would be ideal, but maybe not possible. But I understand your points, absolutely.
Thanks for the question, appreciate it. And yeah, I think, whether it's in the political arena or just in engineering, I think there are definitely dangers of optimization, and that can go down a slippery slope, especially when you consider who are you actually optimizing for, and when that means making cuts, whether in design or in programming, who is actually affected by those cuts. So I think that's a really important perspective. So thank you for bringing that up. So we are a few minutes over, so I am going to wrap up here. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists, Minister Al-Ghabra, Deepak Anand, Durga, Shfaza, Gabrielle. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to really hold space for this important discussion. And I also want to thank you just for your candor and openness and transparency. And as I mentioned, this is a pretty unique event with having representation from each major political party, either at a federal or provincial level. And we're able to have a really, productive and inspiring conversation, despite coming from different, backgrounds and political leanings. So I think that is a good reminder that, of the power of collaboration and really just working, together to, come up with solutions. And I would also just like to take this time to thank the sponsors of National Engineering Month. So National Engineering Month Ontario is a massive undertaking that wouldn't be possible without the partners. So the lead partner, Humber Faculty of Applied Science and Technology, all of the champion partners, all of the ally partners, far too many for me to read off, and advocate partners. So as you can see, this is really a team sport in bringing National Engineering Month together. So thank you to all of those organizations for supporting this. And I would also like to thank everyone in the audience for your engagement, the thoughtful questions and discussion throughout this event. And there are a few more events taking place as the last week of National Engineering Month, but there are a few more really exciting events taking place this week on the topic of engineering and politics. So you can check those out there, and if there's any that interest you, you're welcome to register for them. And that is all that I had for this evening. So thanks again, folks, for joining. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and rest of your National Engineering Month if you choose to celebrate.